Mage 40K, Episode 8. Nice labyrinth you got there. Shame if something happened to it. It turns out you can make the world a better place, and little people can make big changes, so long as they have phenomenal mystic power, as with our little band of mages. We were still running around the warp of the 40K universe, on a mission to fix everything. So far, we had unleashed a plague of empathy on the Dark Elves, weakening Tzeentch, the dark goddess of pain and pleasure. Then we went and had a nice stroll through Nurgle's Garden of Disease, where we convinced the Plague Father that maybe general kindness, and a bit of hygiene, would be a good idea. Also, we needed every single faction, Chaos Gods included, on deck to face the inevitable attack of a universe-devouring entity called Kyle, a pet mimic from a different campaign that we fed several dead gods, and worse things. We had already recruited Nurgle, and had machinations in motion to get Khorne and Tzeentch on side. Now we just had to deal with Tzeentch, the Lord of Magic itself. Surely this would go just fine for a bunch of wizards. Surely. Anyway, we spent our time between missions studying magic as much as humanly possible. Critical also led a series of morning jogs, which Bard and that guy referred to as running away practice. Also, because some people really need adult supervision, Bard got a random idea in his head. He got a hold of our transversal anime importer and got several seasons of Dragon Ball Z, which he shipped to the nearest orc outpost. This would result, eventually, in the orcish belief that you can get stronger by screaming, and many a shout of, Kamehameha! It didn't actually work, so far, but the rest of the party was sure there was going to be an orc with a blonde hair squig one day, and it was going to be a problem. For someone other than us, ideally. Regardless, our break wasn't nearly long enough, and before we wanted, we were leaving the webway and standing before a crystalline wall that stretched both ways into the visible distance. Directly in front of us was an entryway, the Labyrinth of Tzeentch. Well, at least it looked welcoming. We were fairly wary. Unlike our previous two missions, a lot wasn't known about the Labyrinth. Actually, that's the opposite of true. Tons was known about the Labyrinth, but since Tzeentch rewrote the rules whenever the whim took him, any given piece of information was only valid on alternating Thursdays during months with an R during years with a 3 in them. Unless it wasn't. As we'd pointed out, no was a strong word here. So without much ability to prep beyond basic magic enhancements and big guns, we went one step further. Competence and Weeb, our designated should-know-betters, did a bizarre project involving life, spirit, necrodermis, and a lot of shouting. They didn't tell us how or specifically what, but gave us wristbands to wear and muttered something about save points and backups. We knew better than to ask questions we didn't want the answer to. Also, we did some magic to keep all the party in the same location, even if reality around us wasn't too stable. We went in and started to walk. We did our best to use magical senses, including critical control of luck, to figure out the way to the center, because that's probably where the Chaos God was located. We thought. We didn't actually have what you would call a plan, other than talk to him. It had worked well so far, so we were fairly confident. Still, our attempts at using magic to cheat had little effect. We just had to walk for a while. Before long, the crystalline walls opened in front of us to form a T intersection. Given the mutability of everything here, several of us just kept going straight and tried to walk through the wall. It sort of worked, as we didn't bonk off a solid surface, but moved about half a step into the material, before being firmly but gently pushed back into the hallway. Maybe if we tried harder at some other point. Although we did spend a few minutes running into the wall and bouncing off like a firm trampoline. We figured true chaos was our best defense in a place like this. Then we got back to business, and before we went too much further, asked Welshie what his Romulan eyes saw. He peered down one hallway and, after a few moments, noted that something about a particular floor panel looked off. His experience told him it was a trap, but he wasn't sure what kind. Hearing this, Weeb tried a new trick he'd been working on. He reached out his arm and, willing life magic to alter his form, stretched it a few dozen feet down the hall, Mr. Fantastic style. He poked the floor tile, but, not having done this before, wasn't really able to control himself and get a good jab. His hand just kind of landed on it, not hard enough to trigger anything, and it just lay there at the end of a tube of meat. We all spent a few minutes heaving and begging the mind mages to erase our memories. They tried, but something seemed to go haywire every time we used magic. When we tried to use mind, it could come out as forces, disrupting the electrical discharge to that part of the brain, or life, shriveling those particular neurons, or even time, taking the patient back a few seconds before whatever happened. The effect usually ended up more or less the same, but the sphere of magic that was involved seemed to be random. By pure chance, Weeb's life spell randomly came out as life magic, because sometimes the dice like you. Anyway, it was a minute or two before Weeb finished reeling in his arm and the rest of us finished scouring our minds. We looked back down the hallway to the trapped portion, wondering if there was some less horrifying way of safely triggering it, only to peer straight into a 10-foot-tall hedge. Where the hallway had gone east, west, and south, now it went west and north, with another passage also to the west visible a little ways away. Also, the top was open to the sky, although we didn't dare risk trying to fly, given the random magic and what was surely some Tzeentchian trap to deal with. Cheaters. Great. A magically shifting maze. Our only hope was to keep going and pray it would cycle back through some place familiar. This went on for a while, with the labyrinth changing every few minutes, somehow always when we weren't looking. We got a passage with translucent green walls, a series of stark white triangular rooms, an underground mine, a warren of narrow streets, a marbled palace complex, and so on. But, thankfully, after a while we started seeing a repetition. Apparently there were 9 mazes, of course. Or, at least, there were currently 9 mazes. Who knows what we'd find tomorrow, or next year. Anyway, we were fairly certain there was, for now, a specific pattern. The changing walls and passages were annoying, but they weren't insurmountable. It would be a problem if you were the kind to worry about where you were, but we knew we were in the warp, so things like time and space didn't really have any meaning. We were just here. So if here kept changing, it wasn't too big a deal. More a pain in the ass than anything. The problem came when we ran into the first of the labyrinth's defenses. It wasn't demons or anything, at least this time. Instead, we rounded one turn in the hallway to see what looked like a large political chamber of some sort. There were human politicians in suits arguing, but the argument was reasoned and rational. They were conceding points, listening to experts, and trying to reach common consensus to effect reasonable change and improvement for all. We somehow knew that, even if offered an infinite amount of money and power, none of these individuals, nor indeed anyone in their world, would take it if it meant harming someone or causing undue suffering. It was a world where people were intelligent and ethical. All we had to do was enter it. It was, obviously, a psychic siren trap. Several of the party were able to resist the call and pull the rest back, but it was a close thing. A lot of us were tempted. Bart didn't have to be restrained, but that was only because he had collapsed to his knees in tears. The stronger-willed members hustled the rest of us away, and we did our best to gird our minds as we moved on. We came across similar traps as we went. Visions of us as rulers and presidents, images of the perfect job and respect of our families, fame and fortune, and so on. It was a problem, but usually it only hit 1 or 2 of us at once, so the rest were able to grab hold and keep us from walking into a random wall. After a while, the maze seemed to give up on that idea, seeing as it wasn't working very well. No, the real problem was the other random traps we ran across. We were just walking along, minding our own business, when a pit opened up beneath our feet and we fell meters to a hard stone floor. It happened so fast we couldn't do anything to try to fly, float, or otherwise mitigate the damage. So we ended up writhing in pain with shattered legs and begging for magical healing. All except for Welshie and that guy, who had been walking a few feet behind everyone, chatting. They saw us all freeze, drop to the floor, and start moaning and rolling on the ground. As far as they could tell, we were just fine. When we didn't accept this explanation, that guy moved up and pressed his cold, wet dog nose against each of us, jarring us out of the hallucination. Illusory pit traps. Fun! Anyway, after falling prey to the second one of these, we decided to move more slowly. We kept a close lookout for triggers, pressure plates, and similarly odd pieces of masonry. Given the ever-changing nature of the maze, however, this didn't do us a lot of good, until Welshie got tired of everyone screwing around and pulled out a mystically powered scanner. This worked fairly well, although he kept claiming the readings were of something entirely different than what he wanted. Still, he was able to indicate the locations of several traps throughout this version of the maze, as well as something that pinged as powerful, but decidedly not a trap. We figured that was probably our target. Now we just had to get to it through this infernal maze. Fortunately, we were a bunch of incredibly powerful mages with no adult supervision. So we chose violence. Activating his power fist, Critical moved up to a wall and let loose, knocking a huge chunk out of it. There was a muffled response of, "Ow! Dick!" Turns out the walls, floors, and basically everything else were made of demons. Not necessarily sapient or particularly demonic demons, but demons nonetheless. Kind of in the same way that the warp is the home of and made of demons. You know, sort of. The wall seemed hurt, both physically by the damage and emotionally that we would attack it unprovoked. Competence suggested that damaging masonry was the least violent thing we were prepared to do, and started to summon a fireball. The wall took the hint and moved out of our way. This became a theme, although most of the walls took some damage before they would open up. Each time the maze changed, we had to reassert dominance before we could just gesture meaningfully at the rubble behind us to open the way. Good thing we had damage to spare. Still, we now had an unconventional means of navigating the maze, avoiding traps, and heading to our destination. No labyrinth can beat us. So it was that we had a fairly easy time of reaching the strange reading. Well, not that one exactly. The maze changed on us before we could reach it. But we found a working strategy, and had Welshie do another scan. Each time the maze changed, Welshie did a technomagical search for traps and strange readings. Unfortunately, we were only able to scan one time per change, and the first scan would only reveal the nearest traps and similar things. But after multiple passages through each version of the maze, we could scan multiple times. As we moved and kept searching, we generally identified the issues. Most of them, anyway. But we didn't notice that part till later. As far as the anomalous readings, we bashed our way into one corridor, only to turn a corner and see a large, feathered, muscly demon sitting calmly in a chamber at the end of the passage. He spotted us, looked a little surprised, and waved. We waved back and retreated behind the corner. After a few awkward minutes, he shouted out, "Hello, mortals. Can I help you find something? We, don't normally get your kind in the labyrinth." He didn't sound overly hostile, so we decided to commit some diplomacy. Bard helpfully supplied that we were looking for Tzeentch, we thought. "No, of course. That's usually what people are after when they enter our domain. Well, I can probably help you find him." "You know the way out of the maze?" "No, but if you can answer my riddle, and those of 8 of my companions, you will be taken to an audience with the Changer of Ways. It's a new program we're trying this month." This sounded like more of a plan than we currently had, so we asked for the riddle. "I am always the last thing to mend. The middle of middle, the end of end." Competence didn't care for riddles, and was quietly muttering, "Violence is always the answer." But the rest of us wanted to give it a shot. Critical supplied, "The letter D," only to be told, "Nope," as a blast of indeterminate magic hit him in the chest. His armor was able to soak most of it, but we were informed that the penalty for wrong answers increases. We were puzzled, as a few of us had read this riddle before, and knew we had the right answer. Then Mills pointed out that we were in the realm of chaos, and perhaps that was only the right answer for sane persons. We pondered this for a while Competence kept repeating, "Why don't we choose violence?" This seemed a better and better alternative with every passing moment. Fortuitously, as we were chatting, Welshie commented, "Well, I was going to guess Tzeentch, but violence is sounding like a good option." As it turned out, the greater demon heard this, whipped out a notebook, and started scribbling furiously. When we gave him a questioning look, it turned to us and said, "Well, the answer I was looking for was oblivion, but I like this one better. Also, it never hurts to suck up to the boss. Well done, mortals. 1 down, 8 to go. Good luck." And with that version of the labyrinth faded, and didn't return to our rotation. Progress. So now we knew what to look for in each iteration of the maze, And with Welsh's scanner and our ability to think laterally, i.e., bash our way through any walls between us and our target, we were sitting pretty as far as we were concerned. That idea held sway until we came upon another wall and, as was our wont, began to threaten it with brutal destruction. This time, instead of being cowed, the wall opened up and disgorged a sextet of pink, screaming, teethed things that were laughing and whipping their head tentacles around. There was also an ethereal cry of, "Quit fucking up my toys!" It seems we had someone's attention. As we squared up to face the oncoming squad of pink horrors, reality went wobbly, and we noticed that the hallway we were in seemed enlarged, as if it was just enough room to comfortably fit the combatants, so we didn't actually have to worry about positions or blocking too much. How convenient. As an opening gambit, she used matter, it worked right this time, to expand a selection of our god bleach into a smallish moat. Easy enough to jump, but still a deterrence. Or so we thought until the horrors splashed right through it. Their feet turned white, but there didn't seem to be much else going on. Well, okay, more of a faded pink, kind of like if you put cheap red clothes in with your whites. Guess it only worked on plague demons. Physical bashing worked pretty well, though. Well, actually, Critical noticed that some of his attacks sort of made the demons ripple, as if they were made of something rubbery. But enough direct damage worked, and he and Bard were able to take one down. Only for it to explode in a puff of purplish smoke, and two blue horrors appeared in its place, grumbling and blaming each other for getting them punched. The other pink horrors let loose with a blast of concentrated, randomized magic. Most of us dodged, but Bard was distracted laughing at the blue horrors and didn't move fast enough. The life magic that hit him aged him about 40 years in a few seconds. His everything ached. Also, he started yelling at everyone about being on his lawn. There was no grass in the area, and he lived in an apartment in the real world, so we figured he was being in character. Angered by someone damaging one of his minions, Critical responded by pointing one hand at Bard, another at the pink horror that blasted him, dislocated both his wrists, and let loose with entropy magic. Which came out as prime, rewriting the fundamental ontological nature of both figures to switch the aging back. To be clear, the demon was immortal and existed outside of time, but Critical rewrote his very existence, causing the horror to shrivel and turn slightly gray. He was a very salty horror, and limped off the battlefield complaining about kids today and their lack of respect. On her end, Competence also tried the direct approach, and hit one with her Wraithbone sword. She was a bit off, and only struck with the flat of the blade, which caused a rubbery ripple in the creature's flesh, and it began to mock her. Then she pointed out that, edge or no, the strike had been empowered with spirit magic. It didn't get randomized when channeled as part of the Wraithbone, thankfully. The demon went, "Oh, well, that would explain why all my internal organs just burst. Good to know." And it popped into two. The blue horrors retaliated, but their main form of attack, rather than magical blasts, was attempting to throttle people. This resulted in one blue guy getting shaken off, and the other clinging pathetically to Competence's throat like a deranged necklace, as it tried its best to strangle her through the necrodermis armor. It didn't do much, but it was very amusing. Eventually she gave it a hard smack, and it vanished in another puff of smoke, only to be replaced by two yellow, sulfur-smelling brimstone horrors. Each was dangling from one of her ears, and they swore up and down that they were fancy earrings, not demons that needed to be violently smote. Well, she also started taking pot shots, and poofed a couple of pink demons. There was now a much more sizable horde, but their strength and power was in an inverse ratio to their numbers. In the end, Mills and Weeb just laid down a swath of burning with their flamethrowers, and a bunch of the blue horrors, and the brimstone horrors they turned into, were left as smoldering piles of goo. And then there was that guy. He tried to distract one of the horrors with his squeaky ball. However, when he tried to summon the toy, the magic twisted, and a chunk of the nearby horror's rubbery flesh pulled off and formed the shape of the toy. The demon didn't seem bothered by this, but that guy was duly horrified, which may explain why his attempt to distract the monstrosity with mind magic didn't work right. Or maybe the magic warped again. Either way, the pink horror just laughed when that guy presented the ball, grabbed the toy, and burned it up with magic. This enraged the dog man, and he retorted with a long, steady stream from his handy flamethrower. He may or may not have been cackling, "This is what happens when you don't want to play!" But it was unclear over the roar of burning promethium. Finally, all but one horror, and its subsequent devolutions, was dealt with. The demons had done their best, but between our armor and magical defenses, any damage they did was temporary at best. As we set upon our last victim, Critical tried to make sure it wouldn't split and keep annoying us. He tried to use entropy to undo its ability to split, somehow. He wasn't real clear on the specifics, just that he was brute forcing the magic. Except, as is the way in Tzeentch's Labyrinth, the spell came out as correspondence magic. So when we killed the creature, it did split, but the two blue horrors tried to exist in the same physical space as each other and their pink antecedent. Of course, this was immediately fatal, so each of those blue guys split, and again they all ended up in the same chunk of space-time, somehow remaining even after their destruction. So 7 beings encompassing the primary color wheel all ended up in the same spot at the same time. The resulting brownish, pulsating mess was too gross to look at, and we'd gotten a private tour of Nurgle's garden. Also, it was still alive, and screaming. The chunk of maze we were in opened up, the sky above us, which had just been ceiling, parted, and a piece of paper floated down into Critical's grasp. It was a job application to Ways Changing, LLC. This led to a debate between Critical and Competence as to who was more war-crimey, and those of us not engaged in the discussion or the cleanup could hear a mass scuttling, as if every demon in the labyrinth was getting the hell out of our way. From there, we didn't have much more immediate trouble. Surprise. The space went back to normal, or as normal as a chunk of the warp can get, although it felt like even the walls were leaning away from us. New openings tended to appear whenever we mentioned wanting to go that way. Smart walls. We were the true nightmares of the warp, and we made sure the labyrinth knew it as we continued on through the changing sections. We were partway through another cycle, marking traps and bashing our way through walls, before we found another one of the greater demons. This Lord of Change gave us the riddle, "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 at the evening?" Competence reiterated that she didn't do riddles, only violence, but she did know this was from The Hobbit. Bard commented that she really didn't do riddles because it was from the myth of Oedipus and the Sphinx, and the regular answer was man, or a person. But we all knew that the Lord of Change didn't want the official answer, just something appropriately demonic. A shape-shifting demon was suggested, and when the bird creature looked uncertain, Mills began to regale it with tales of what we had done to the last demons we encountered. She made mental images. It's a bit hard to describe a blue bird thing looking nauseated, but it clearly did. Then, after a few gulps, it sighed and said, "Well, I was looking for whatever Tzeentch says, but a shape-shifting demon is close enough. Well done, little mortals. You have cleared this section." And that version of the labyrinth faded out with what we swore was a muttered, "Good riddance." From here, our attitude was best described as, "Nice labyrinth you got here. Shame if something happened to it." We threatened and abused our way through each section, steadily zeroing in on the greater demons and their bizarre riddles. We did walk into a few traps, but reminded ourselves that they were mostly mind pit traps and mind spears and such, and didn't actually affect our bodies. Then we brutalized the wall or floor holding the traps as a warning to the rest. The hedge maze version didn't stand a chance, as we had packed our flamethrowers. It was a fairly pleasant walk after that, and the Lord of Change was staring slack-jawed as we approached. There was a corridor right over there. And now there's a corridor there. Keep up." "Okay, well, I'm just going to give you a riddle and be rid of you people. What is black and white and red all over?" We puzzled over this for a moment. The warp was suggested, and an argument was had over whether color existed in the immaterium, or if it could be considered all colors at once. To prove his point, Welshie tried to desaturate the room we were in, but it came out as spirit magic. Suddenly everything was black and white, but we were all in trench coats, fedoras, and smoking cigarettes while jazz played in the distance. Bard helpfully identified it as the spirit of film noir filling us all, even the demon, who appreciated the convoluted web of deceit and betrayal he could sense around every corner. After a few minutes, and a bizarre interview with a dame with legs you could kill for and a sob story full of nothing but trouble, we shook it off. The demon admitted that we had a point, so there wouldn't be any penalty, but that wasn't the answer he was looking for. Also, he asked for some film and book recommendations before we left. Back to the riddle, that guy remembered that the Changer of Ways and the Plague Father hated each other, and suggested, "A beast of Nurgle turned inside out? 'Cause it's black and white, like larva, and then the red of its guts." The beasts were sort of a greenish, pustulent white, but we didn't point this out. The demon paused, pondered for a moment, then finally shouted at the air, "Judges!" There was a moment, then a bright ding from out of space, and the demon said, "Technically incorrect. I was looking for a skinned sororitas, but we'll take it because it's funny." Success! Bard handed him a list of recommended reading/watching as we faded. Once more we were transported to another section of Labyrinth. We felt like we had a handle on things now. We walked for a ways before stumbling across what our detection magics indicated was a pink horror-spewing trap. Knowing where it was, we set up an ambush around the entrance. Or started to, when Critical had the idea of repeating his, quote, ultimate clown car trick, using that guy's correspondence abilities. Our consultation on what and how to accomplish this was loud and graphic, and we could feel not only the demons on the other side of the wall, but everything nearby holding its breath. Then we faded out, and appeared in another incarnation of the maze. We all felt the collective sigh of relief as we went. Then, we decided, we're powerful mages in a dimension made of magic and will. Fuck that noise. That guy channeled his correspondence skills, enhanced by Critical's entropy. Then we all joined in because our magic could technically be anything. And by our powers combined, we transferred back to the former maze. Everything there froze as we appeared with a cry of, "We weren't finished with you." In moments we set up the correspondence trap, then Mills walked over, slapped the trigger mechanism on the wall, and there was a collective, "No!" from the entire maze as the horrors jumped out, coalesced, split, and did it all over again. The mass left on the floor just blinked at it with its 17 eyes. Don't worry about the math. And gave a feeble, "Why?" Then a voice of a Lord of Change came from a distant corridor, shouting, "What's light during the day but heavy at night? Depression, which is what you give me. Now get out!" And we found ourselves unceremoniously dumped in the next part of the labyrinth. As it turned out, we were only a few turns and twists away from our next target, and we found the Lord of Change before long. "I'm soft, delicate, and silky, but if wrapped in me you'll scream. If you can. What am I?" Competence started grumbling, and this demon, who was apparently a bit more pretentious, or clueless, than the others, told her to take her complaints to Korn where they were welcome. "Around here, we use our words, like civilized creatures." This led to more dark mutterings and something about, "Use your words when your lungs are filled with iron," but the rest of us liked his spunk. Weeb offered Slaaneish's embrace, while Welshie suggested a beast of Nurgle's hug, to which the bird responded, "Both excellent answers. I would accept either. Well done, I grant you passage. And thank you both for being cultured about things," he said, with a pointed look at Competence. She demanded we do the correspondence trick and go back to teach him a lesson, but we argued that if we mutilated everyone who sassed us, we'd never get anything done. Also, by majority rule, it was kind of funny. Also, we weren't really sure we could take on one of Tzeentch's lieutenants in his own domain, so we kept going. The rest of us did take a moment to ponder where Competence's morality ball had wandered off to, though. So we kept meandering through the maze, much less worried than when we had entered. We tried to keep to the standard paths, but occasionally we had to menace a non-compliant wall. In some variations of the labyrinth we came across doors, but they were all mysteriously unlocked, and a few swung slightly ajar as we approached, as if they had heard rumors. We were able to scan for traps as we re-entered each section, which helped a lot, but wasn't perfect. We set off a handful of mine traps, but we were able to heal ourselves without too much trouble. Although one attempt at life magic came out as spirit, and summoned the ghost of Arlie Ermy, the drill instructor from Full Metal Jacket, who screamed profanities at us for 5 minutes straight before calling us a bunch of pansies and telling us to walk it off. Which actually worked, because magic is funny like that. The most interesting thing was when we wandered into another one of the pink horror ambushes. It caught about half of us off guard, but Competence and Critical had just been thinking it was about time for another fight, so they were prepared when the creatures popped out of the wall. This was a bad thing for the demons, or at least the ones who popped out of a hole in reality to meet Critical's power fist coming the other way at speed. It started to leap as a single pink horror, and it landed as two very confused blue horrors. Competence channeled magic through her wraithbone rapier, trying to make it a holy, flaming sword. It sort of worked, but the magic came out as matter instead of spirit. It did flame, but mostly because it was somehow coated in white phosphorus. Behold the war crime blade. She just stabbed the demons and they ran around on continual fire until they popped. Except the white phos, possibly because of its magical nature, stayed stuck on the devolved creatures, so they kept burning too. The brimstone horrors, when they appeared, didn't seem as bothered by the burning, but it was still disturbing, as were Competence's stifled giggles. Then the rest of us laid into the demons with more traditional flamethrowers, blasters, and magic. After a while, we insisted that Competence stop with the flaming sword, or we would find a way to reinvent the Hague. So she tried to do the spirit magic again, but this time it came out prime. She started cutting at the entire fabric of the demons' beings, unmaking their ontological place in the pattern of reality. This did not make us feel any better, but there was less demonic screaming, so we took what we could get. In fact, several of us tried to focus on prime magic just to see what would happen. Well, she tried to smash two blue horrors together with gravity, but merged them instead with prime, so they ended up a single two-headed blue horror that argued with itself about everything, although they both agreed that, well, she was a dick, before they wandered off to hang with Kairos Fateweaver. We wandered around taking notes, much to the DM's chagrin, because a sword that could literally unwrite demons would be very useful. Finally, feeling a bit depressed, Bard wandered over to the remaining pink horrors and had a friendly chat about whether or not they were paid enough for this. When he tried and failed to explain the concept of pay, he did finally convince one that, while Tzeentch might kill it at some point in the future, we would definitely kill it right here and now. And kill would probably be the gentlest option. The final one tried to go down swinging. His regret was very deep, but, fortunately for him, very short. That was pretty much the last of the traps, as we had either identified the locations of the remainders, or they were simply too afraid to trigger. So a bit of wandering took us to the remaining Lords of Change ere long. Their riddles were still disturbingly off, but some of us were starting to get the hang of things. We got the following riddles. What's the kind of ball you shouldn't throw? Or hit or kick or pitch? After a few moments of pondering, Welshie suggested a testicle, but was told it was a bit too Slaneshy and please try again. Someone said an Eldar ball, like a dance. The demon agreed they shouldn't be thrown, but mostly because they were incredibly tedious, so not quite. Weeb guessed an eyeball. This was correct, although we were told that a brain would have also been acceptable, and we were congratulated for managing this one without violence. What falls but never breaks? Morals. Ooh, that is a good one. I was thinking of standards, but 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Good job. Eyes open and you can see me. Eyes closed and I'm right next to you. What am I? Darkness. That would be the correct mundane answer, but this is Tzeentch's Labyrinth, so no, sorry. Competence shouted, the all-consuming void, while Weeb went with the demon Samus at the same time. The demon looked between the two, said, the answer I had was the warp, but I think between those two combined, and the fact that I've been watching you progress, and you all scare the shit out of me, that sounds like a good enough answer. Congrats. I'm blue on the inside, red on the outside, and you probably shouldn't drink me. Tau with its skin flayed off. Ooh, good one. I was looking for a pink horror, blue horror, but I really do like that answer. I'm adding that to the book. Nice. And with that, the maze faded, along with our sense of self-decency. When the scene solidified again, we were no longer in a maze. Instead, we were standing on a wide platform, about the size of a football field, floating in something resembling a psychedelic vision of space. Lots of stars and nebulae and unspeakable colors, with a few floating rocks dotted around the central arena. And we got the feeling of something huge watching us. Arrayed against us were 9 Space Marines. Their armor was antiquated and had ornate crests decorated with gold standing up behind their helmets. A very scarabee, Egyptian-y sort of theme. They were painted in teal blue, and they stood perfectly still and silent. From behind them, another Marine, this one with sigil-laden robes over his armor, stepped forward and addressed us. Before he could speak, Weeb shouted, "Hello, Sons of Magnus." "We don't care for that name." "Oh, why not?" "Our Gene-Father was well-intentioned, but he fell short. We are the Rubric Marines, the true mages of chaos." "Oh yeah? How's that working out for you? When's the last time you got to scratch your armpit?" The silent Marines didn't say or do anything, but our magical senses told us there was a deep spiritual sigh, representing thousands of years of phantom itch. The banter went on for a few minutes more, although it didn't have much effect beyond irritating the one speaking Astartes and making the rest of us chuckle. But the speaker did identify himself as Ahriman. This caused some surprise, and those of us who were 40k nerds were appropriately starstruck. Weeb asked, "Isaac Ahriman?" "Yes." "The Isaac Ahriman?" "Yes, indeed." "Isaac, it's my personal fault all my brothers got turned into dust instead of being the powerful magical warriors they were meant to be, Ahriman?" Usually nicknames are shorter than the actual name, you know." "Yeah, but you're a special boy, aren't you?" Bard supplied that being the objectively biggest fuck-up Space Marine psyker in all of Imperial history was a legitimate achievement, and we were appropriately honored to meet him. This comment didn't make things better. Also, while Bard and Weeb were distracting our enemy with insults, Critical explained the dust-filled Rubric Marines to everyone else, and Competence began making plans to steal them as magic Space Marine butlers. The inevitable fight didn't last all that long, but what did happen was fairly unpleasant. That guy was the first to take any sort of quote-unquote hostile action, although this consisted of running up to Ahriman with his squeaky ball. He dropped it and both stared at each other for a few minutes. When Ahriman looked unimpressed, that guy went nuclear. Pumping his magical will into the mind magic, he hit the Marine with the puppy dog eyes. It went past Ahriman's conscious will and straight into the fringe-shaped center of his brain, and the wizard was distracted playing fetch with an anthropomorphic dog. Part of the magic was that if that guy kept this going long enough, his target would become non-hostile. Not exactly friendly, but non-hostile unless attacked. We justified this as most problems in the 40k universe resulting from people just really needing to pet a dog or a cat or something. This didn't help the rest of us, though, because the Rubric Marines had already gotten their orders. As one, the 9 of them turned to face us, raised their bolters, and unleashed a volley. We had been distracted watching the game of fetch, making plans, and or crafting new insults, so pretty much all of us took the bolt shells to the chest. Our armor earned its keep, but these were magically enhanced bolter shells, so earning their keep meant that most of our bits were still within arm's reach when they were done. But Weeb had enough juice left to struggle to his feet and begin magically twerking us back to health. While this had been happening, Competence had moved to the side and beckoned one Marine over. Not having orders against it, it complied. She reached out with spirit magic, which seemed to be working as intended in this new location. She didn't have the life magic to give it back a body, but she could do something with its soul and general sense of agency. She didn't have a rope to re-ensoul someone. It would have been very concerning if she had, frankly. So it was tough going. Then she dug deep and pumped all the quintessence, or magical energy, she had gathered in the warp into the effort. The Marine juddered for a moment, then looked at her again and started to raise its gun. She shouted, "Wait! We are from the Emperor, and we can restore you!" To which it responded with some sort of spirit voice, "No, you can't. The Emperor doesn't care about us." "Wait, I just said something. I just had a thought. Holy shit!" And the former Dust Marine began to ask Competence a whole bunch of questions. Around this time, Weeb began his healing dance, and after a while the Rubric Marine noted, "Gee, this is a fun beat. Kind of makes you want to shake your booty. I haven't done that in millennia." "Wait, I have an ass again! The healing magic had gotten to him as well, and thanks to all the power Weeb was putting into it, to get our organs to dance their way back into our torsos, it had a slight effect on the Rubric Marine, since he was near enough to the mage to be affected. The Marine was now not just dust in armor, but a soul and an ass and dust in armor. Still, after 10,000 years, an upgrade was an upgrade. Also around this time, Ahriman stopped throwing the ball for that guy. You see, he had a good deal of magical mojo, or at least enough to see the general presence and effect of magical energies on the weave of reality, which we referred to as Prime. And what he had just seen was someone gesture with what was clearly a toy gun, cause magic to happen, then, when said magic fizzled out, grab reality by the throat and slap it around a little until it remembered its place. All to do something that he had spent 10 millennia failing to accomplish, using eldritch spells, incantations, city-sized magic circles, and all sorts of infernal pacts. This woman accomplished it with a plastic focus and willpower. Then he looked at what Weeb was doing, and had a closer inspection of the rest of us as well. Well, she chose this moment to try to use matter magic to restore a Rubrique's body. The attempt failed, but Ahriman could see the basics of magic being performed with a single focus and a stubborn refusal to allow reality to have its own way. Then he marched, forcefully but not aggressively, across the platform, grabbed Competence by the shoulders, firmly but gently, got real close to her face, and said, "Teach me everything." Competence responded, "Sure." And then the fight was over. Well, not quite. In his distraction, Ahriman forgot to turn off the Rubric Marines, so they took another shot at the rest of us. But by this time, Welshie had been abused into setting up a force field for us. As an injured weeb did the healing dance, he shouted, "Why would you do matter stuff with the Marines? You're the guy who makes cover. Why would you use matter to do life shit? This is what happens when you get out of your lane." So, with the force field, they didn't do any damage. Also, they seemed a bit hesitant, as if even they had some idea of what was in the offing. But Ahriman told them to stand down, and we all started to make plans to do some indiscriminate educating. Until, that is, a voice came out from the void all around the platform. It was both booming and petulant at the same time.
"What the hell are you doing? You're not supposed to talk. You're supposed to fight. You're ruining my plans. Toys aren't supposed to have their own plans. You stink like Nurgle and you're spoiling my games. Go away."
And a massive blue hand plucked us from the platform and hurled us across the realm. We were followed by Ahriman's shouts of, "God damn it, not again! Don't worry, I'll find you and you can teach me." We got a fantastic view of the ever-shifting, kaleidoscopic maze as we sailed overhead, although it was a fairly brief journey. In a few moments, physics being weird in the warp, we were able to see our impending landing spot. Sort of. You see, Tzeentch had tossed us, with godly aim, straight at the Well of Eternity. This was an aperture, shaped sort of like a giant well, that led to the Deep Warp. You see, the 4 Chaos Gods, for all their might, only represent the thoughts and emotions of beings from the Milky Way galaxy, at least as far as anyone knows. But the warp itself exists alongside all physical reality in the whole universe, and the universe is a huge place compared to a single galaxy. One theory has it that the Chaos Gods we know just represent small shoals darting through the shallows of the true Sea of Souls. Even Tzeentch doesn't know what's down there. He sent numerous minions to explore, largely because they pissed him off, but only one ever came back. A Lord of Change, Kairos Fateweaver, was tossed into the well and came back with a second head. One head had perfect recall of the past, all pasts everywhere, and the other had absolute knowledge of the future. So, yeah, not the kind of place you want to go. And we were headed straight into it, without enough time to try to counter anything. From the outside perspective, we dropped into the Well of Eternity with a terminal kaplunk. Tzeentch, who had stepped into the area to watch more closely, smacked his hands together in appreciation of a job well done. Then, as he started to turn, a watery hand burst over the lip of the well, and a god screamed. Well, shrieked is a better word given the pitch, and our party of merely mortal mages pulled ourselves out of the deep warp, dripping magic, all visibly touched by our experience. Before we could do much more than stand up and check ourselves to make sure all our parts were still there was a mighty nope, and we once more found ourselves sailing through the immaterium. This time we were on a trajectory straight out of the Changer's domain. We started to force our way back, just to terrorize the bird brain, but we decided we'd probably done enough to weaken him overall. Or we had made enough of an impression that we could get our other allies to open negotiations. Also, we determined through mystic visions that we were headed back to our old ship, the O Imperator Quare, probably because of some tie to our backup bodies. Along the way, we compared notes about what we had seen. We all saw different things, but we all came back with another level of arete and our primary sphere of magic. We also all had an overpowered limit break type spell that could help out in a pinch, but also tended to be dangerous. That guy saw everyone he had killed in his magical adventures waiting for him. This could be bad, but as a dogman, he just saw them as a bunch of friends waiting to pet him, and he was thrilled. Until they all called him a bad dog. His mind broke a little, and he forced himself to be happy in response, as a sort of defense mechanism. So much so that he came back radiating happiness, and it could infect you if you got too close. Also, he was able to draw people into a dimension of his own making, Jujutsu Kaisen style, where they would be cuddled to incapacitation by hordes of puppies. But each time he used it, that person's negativity tainted the realm, and that guy became a bit more feral. Although, given his normal state, it was less like overt violence and more like cute aggression. Competence saw that infinity was composed of all possibilities, everywhere, including ones she had known only as fiction. Now, she could send people's souls to fictional worlds, in a sort of inversion of Bard's summoning. She also came back with a metallic sheen to her skin, because, you see, it was becoming metal, necrodermis specifically. She had sent her own soul to her alternate selves universe in preparation for our pending adventures, and she was becoming more Necron-like. But at least her defenses went up. She also, in similar fashion, had a spirit-based version of our empathy virus. She could throw the morality ball at people. Well, she saw all of the alternate human versions of himself across reality. He saw them all fail. He saw all of humanity fail. Over and over. And in response, he jettisoned his humanity. We had joked for a long while that he was a Romulan, but he was really just a technocratic human with strong opinions. He came out of the deep warp a true Romulan. An actual Xenos. But he was a Star Trek Xenos, so everyone assumed he had just had some cosmetic or surgery on his ears and skin and a really bad haircut. We were the only ones who recognized his true alienness. He had also learned how to tune his matter transporter to summon an actual Romulan hit squad, or possibly a bunch of goons who cosplayed a Romulan hit squad. Our spirit mages refused to look into it too much. We wondered if he really tried, he could summon a Romulan bird of prey. Critical saw his truest of horrors, the multiverse-eating monster Kyle, made entirely of spiders. When he told us this, we all cringed. When he returned, his skin was bleached white out of fear, which sort of made sense. The bone fragments jutting out of it less so, but we assumed it was deep warp stuff. Also, he had a pet spider, about tarantula size, that was a living piece of Kyle. It acted as a familiar and allowed him to extend his luck warpery to everyone in the party. The rest of us swore we would kill it dead if he fed it anything exotic. He claimed it just existed and didn't consume at all, but that didn't make us feel much better. Bard saw the infinity of infinities as each universe spawned a multiverse. Then each part of the multiverse spawned its own multiverse, and so on and so on. All while someone who may have been Coyote, or may have been an alternate self, gave a running narration, and told bad puns. Then, finally, he saw what he claimed was the author. He didn't go into specifics, but we all knew something was off because when he came back, his voice sounded like a choir speaking all at once. It was basically the entire multiversal legion of bards that he had set up previously, acting through him at once. Finally, his new spell was Summon Bigger Fish, which allowed him to summon something more powerful than whatever he was dealing with from the multiverse. Kind of like hitting the Godzilla button, with all the associated risks. As Weeb fell into the deep warp, he connected for the briefest of moments with all life in the universe, including rocks, trees, people, Tau, Eldar, the Hive Mind, the Necron Stormlord, and everything else. Incubus Weeb and regular Weeb separated, then grasped onto each other for dear life. They saw the true math underlying all the universe and cried out in terror, until they heard a voice behind them, telling them to chill. It was accompanied by rock music. Then the Weebs saw a unicorn, a god of music from a campaign Weeb himself had created and run. The unicorn greeted him like an old friend, and told him that, while math did in fact lie beneath everything, it could be understood as music. This made sense to Weeb, and allowed him to reconfigure his sanity, along with an advanced understanding of prime magic. He also had a unicorn horn, which he could move around his body with light magic, but couldn't get rid of. Note, per Weeb's in-game admission, he never thought of putting it on his crotch until he saw the look of horror on the DM's face. The DM does not believe him. He also had constantly playing background music, which he could only sort of hear and or control. Mills didn't show up, which was somewhat concerning, until we found a postcard that showed a pleasant beach against a sky of incomprehensible colors and a big banner saying, "Wish you were here." It said she was fine, but was taking a break. 40K was too depressing and, quote, getting too real, whatever that meant. So she was going to a vacation multiverse on the other side of infinity for a while. Maybe take up improv. This seemed like the smartest option available, so we couldn't judge. Just seethe with envy. The final thing we compared notes on was the message we received as we returned to the regular warp. To save the 41st millennium, the Emperor must die. But that was a problem for tomorrow. For today, we found ourselves hurtling back through the Immaterium toward what we recognized, after much debate, and some mystical double-checking, to be our former base of operations. Until, a few hundred yards from one of the bays, we all smacked into an invisible wall, like someone walking into a sliding glass door. It was more embarrassing than painful. Then the wall flickered for a second and we were through. We landed in one of the aft cargo bays, only to be greeted by blaring sirens and flashing lights as the ship system screamed about a Gellerfield breach. We were picking ourselves up when Twitch, the paranoid demolitions expert, came down a corridor. We were about to greet him, but he shouted, "It's them! The Xenodemon Psychers are back! Kill them before their taint can spread to the rest of us!" And he bolted back down the hall, shedding several small objects as he went. Well, that couldn't be good. End of episode 8. Thank you, everyone, for joining us with this episode. This one was an interesting one. Less combat. Although, of course, knowing this group, find your way through a maze. We're going to punch the walls, because screw it. A lot of weird fun. A lot of creative interpretations of things, and having fun with the magic and all sorts of war crimes happening. From here, we are entering the final arc of the campaign. We still have to deal with the Necrons, the Tyranids, and parts of the Imperium, apparently. And we're going to start by dealing with the All Guards party. But nicely, because we like them. Probably. Maybe. We'll see. Anyway, had a great time making this one and playing it. Hope y'all enjoyed. Hope you're here for the next one. Take care. Bye.